You wouldn't like me when I'm angry. I don't care if I destroy my mind, as long as I slaughter all of you.
The Bouncer,
or simply Bouncer in Japan, a 3D side-scrolling beat-em-up video game co-developed by Squaresoft and the Dream Factory and released for the PlayStation 2 in December 2000.
Not to be confused with the 2018 French-Belgian action thriller film The Bouncer, starring Jean-Claude Van Damme.
The Bouncer was highly anticipated upon its arrival back in 2000. Not only was it Squaresoft's first game on the next generation of games consoles, plus boasted having Shinji Hashimoto, Takashi Takita, Toetsu Nomura and Noriko Matsueda of Final Fantasy fame working on it, it also had Sony's hype machine behind it, showing off its stunning visuals, superior gameplay, and with a truly cinematic presentation, it was in many ways perceived to be the true first next generation fighting game on the PlayStation 2. As one of the marquee titles in the first batch of PlayStation 2 games, it was met with poor sales and mixed reviews. The Bouncer tells the story of three bouncers in the fictional Edge City on a rescue mission to save their young friend from the Mikado Group, a solar technology megacorporation owned by a megalomaniac Duragan C. Mikado. The plot unfolds differently depending on which character the player chooses for specific gameplay sequences. When it was first announced at the Tokyo Game Show in 1999 that Square was working on 3 PlayStation 2 titles, it was assumed that the Bouncer was going to be Urges 2. Early footage showed 3 main characters, a woman and 2 men, fighting a gang of ninjas in a cafe. Later that year it was reported that the game was not a sequel but an original story that would be one of the PlayStation 2's launch titles. Later in the year, Square showed off Square's seamless action battle system that would allow players to go from adventure sequence to fighting sequence without the intermittent cutscene or FMV. Adventure elements would flow effortlessly into street brawls with as many as 10 other characters.
If we're not doing anything, it means the bar's doing just fine, right, Sion?
The gaming press at the time were clearly very enthusiastic about the look of the game, saying that it had the look of something straight out of Hollywood. The Bouncer was the first game to use Dolby Digital 5.1 surround sound, not only for the FMVs but gameplay itself, and whilst gameplay was partially derived from Dream Factory's Urges and the Tobal games, graphically the atmosphere was developed with the use of filters and lighting. Personally, I've always thought the game had a very Final Fantasy look to it, and you can see how the game has influenced later Final Fantasy games on the PlayStation 2.
Go today, you first came to this bar and started that giant brawl fest.
Then that means today's your first anniversary as a bouncer. Here.
The selling point of an action game is the feeling of oneness with the characters, but on the other hand, action games lack characterization and story development. RPGs cover most of these narrative factors, but command input RPGs sacrifice the tempo, thrill factor and feeling of intimacy. The Bouncer system is a combination of the best elements of these two genres.
you ready?
The game would have 3 available modes of play: story, versus and survival, and would expect the story mode to take roughly 7 to 8 hours to complete thoroughly.
No. Whilst I will say that if you're a completionist, then yes, you could well be looking at 7 hours of playtime. A standard playthrough of the game will take you a good 1.5 hours at best. 3 hours, let's say 3.5 hours if you're exploring all the other available modes.
However, after Square only showed a 10-second clip at the Spring Tokyo Game Show only months before its intended release, some journalists rumoured that there may be a problem behind the scenes. This was made worse at another trade show later in the year where Square showed off new footage but did not provide a playable demo. Finally, in late 2000, co-developers Dream Factory reported they were having difficulty working with the PlayStation 2 hardware, and that the game had been pushed back to January 2001 in North America. Square announced a Japanese release date of December 23, 2000, and on December 18th they confirmed a North American release date of January 30, 2001, although this was quickly pushed back to March. Combat controls in the Bouncer are not unlike those found in the Tobal or Urgi's games. Buttons signify high, middle and low attacks, whilst others are used for blocking and special moves. It's a simple set of controls that is easy to feel out if this is your first time playing this type of game. During gameplay, players have a health meter, which if drained means the player dies. Players often have a limited number of guard points at their disposal, but the on-screen HUD does not show this. The number of guard points diminishes as the player blocks, and if they are utterly gone, the player can no longer block oncoming attacks. Combat in the game makes use of ragdoll physics, which allows characters to be thrown a few feet into the air, making it easier to juggle enemies by hitting them repeatedly. Enemies may also be hurled or otherwise hit against each other, causing both of them to take damage at once.
I feel like it didn't feel like I was actually doing anything. I wasn't fighting anyone. Oh, these are the black-shirted security guys. They are tougher. Yeah, you get it.
The Bouncer is structured as a series of short gameplay segments interspersed with cinematic cutscenes that tell the game's story. One of the game's biggest selling points was the ACS system, Active Character Selection System. It gives the player the choice of protagonist to play in the following gameplay segment. Whoever you choose, the other characters are controlled by the AI. For the most part, combat in the Bouncer is made up of you, the active player, in hand-to-hand combat with a group of enemies, using various basic and special moves that the player has unlocked. Every so often the AI-controlled bouncers will do a taunt, alerting the player to press the right buttons to activate a team attack that damages all enemies on screen at that time, although this does not work in boss encounters. In some sections of the game, however, you are tasked with objectives that does not involve fighting, such as finding a keycard, running through hallways to avoid being caught, and even in one section dressing up as a Mikado soldier and learning a set of weird signals to get through undetected.
This encounter is hilarious and one of a kind.
Gameplay sections end when the player has either defeated all of the enemies in that area, achieved a set goal, or defeated a boss character.
Yeah. Chariot soldier.
At the end of each engagement, the player is awarded BP points, bouncer points, for that character, that can be used to level up the character's health, power and defense stats, as well as unlocking new fighting moves. The more points you spend on each character allows them to level up, with levels marked out of grade G to grade A, and finally an S rank.
Ever wanted to know why so many video games rank up to S? Well, GameRanx have done a video that's well worth watching on the subject. There is a description and the link down below. Please go and give it a watch and tell them that I sent you.
As the story mode is quite short, there are two other modes to sink your teeth into. The first is a single player survival mode. Every time you survive a round, the game gets more difficult. If you took damage in the previous stages, at the start of each new stage your health bar remains depleted. In total there are 10 stages in survival mode and a total of 50 enemies to fight through. Lastly, there is multiplayer versus mode. The Bouncer supports the PlayStation 2's multi-tap that can allow up to 8 people to play on one console. However, the Bouncer only supports up to 4 players to play the Battle Royale mode. The mode can also be played in single player with AI-controlled opponents. At its core, the Bouncer is a multiplayer beat-em-up. You fight against gangs of enemies on screen at the same time, which, don't get me wrong, is fun, but maybe just not as incredible as the Sony hype machine was painting it out to be. I'll happily admit that I was at the time blown away by the graphics and gameplay, but coming back to it now has made me realise that the Bouncer is just a very pretty 2.5 brawler with some bells and whistles and questionable storyline.
Yeah, about that.
The main focus of the game is its story mode, which is really just a third of the whole game. The game tells the story of 3 friends who work as bouncers at one of the city's bars. Sion, Ko and Volt appear as very fabulously dressed with very distinct styles, but rather slack bouncers. And whilst the game tries to paint them as low-key,
Volt looks like this. I'm not sure if those horns are real or some type of body modification, but it's not like you're going to miss this guy in a crowd.
Also working at the bar is Sion's roommate/girlfriend Dominique.
Hi, sorry, me again. Okay, according to the game's manual it says that Dominique is 15 years old. Not only does that bring into question how she's able to work in a bar, but also how is she living on her own with Sion, who according to the game's manual is... 19 years old!
Suddenly, out of the blue, Dominique is kidnapped by an equally fabulously dressed group of Special Forces goons, who drop from the sky, run, jump and fight like they are straight out of Naruto.
At the time the game came out, Naruto wasn't really a thing. I remember a lot of reviews at the time are likening the Mikado Special Forces to the characters from the movie Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
So, rather than calling the police like normal people, the three friends set out to rescue Dominique. The story mode is at least unique, and the ability to choose Sion, Ko or Volt for each enemy encounter is an interesting way to tell the story. It isn't until you've played the game a few times that you notice a rather staged setup for each section. Watch a cutscene, fight, save, watch another cutscene, fight, save, and so on until you complete the game. And play the game a few times is exactly what you'll have to do to get the full conclusion to the story. One thing the developers had on their mind when making this game was replayability, which was very much the order of the day for video games developed back in the 90s and early 2000s. They wanted you to play the game over and over again and get every bit of content out of it, whereas today they would just sell you that content at a premium price. At the very least you'll need to play through the game 3 times to get the whole elaborate story, once for each of the playable bouncers, Volt, Ko and Sion. Whilst I'm sure that in development meetings that sounded like a good idea, and may have sounded cool at the time, after your first playthrough you'll know about 95% of the whole story, and getting the last 5% from 2 full playthroughs of the story is really just excruciatingly tedious.
This thing's probably carrying rocket fuel for that shuttle launch everyone's been talking about.
As a closing note on gameplay, let's talk about those camera angles. For the most part they're fine. The smooth tracked isometric camera perspective isn't a problem for about 90% of the game, but that 10% is infuriating and horrible, mostly because it's when you're in a boss fight or in a small tight space, and worst of all, when you're in a boss fight in a small tight space. The camera angles are the one thing that stick out as a reminder that the game was rushed to market and is not only irritating but something that you wouldn't expect from Squaresoft. For its time, the Bouncer was indeed the best looking game on the PlayStation 2. Beautifully polished and elaborate environments coupled with classic Squaresoft character design, you really notice the inspiration they'd taken from the Final Fantasy games, but on a far larger scale. From Volt's horns through to Ko's tattoos to Sion's spiky hair, the Bouncer's trio of heroes are elaborate unto themselves. This was by far the most detailed and realistic game that Squaresoft had ever done before. Hair and clothing moved with a sense that they are abiding by real physics, something that console players had not really seen before. Baggy clothes bounced and swayed, and long hair flowed and moved, rather than looking like it was gelled solid to the characters' heads.
Guess there's no point in hiding.
The overall look of the Bouncer isn't just down to Squaresoft's powerhouse of talent behind it. The Dream Factory added a glossy filter that smooths everything out. Whilst you could say that it makes the game look like it had a Vaseline filter on it at all times, back in the early 2000s this look was very much in fashion. The Bouncer was certainly the first game to pull this look off with success, as it eradicated any aliasing or flickering from the game. It also made it almost indistinguishable to tell when the game jumped from in-game graphics to CG. Sure, by today's standards you can tell the difference in a nanosecond, but back in the day this wowed the game playing public.
If you want to see what I mean, and you don't have a PlayStation 2 and a copy of the Bouncer to hand, and worse still, you didn't get a chance to play this back in 2000 and witness the wow factor for yourself, fear not. Myself, Ninja Chloe and Tiger Tom will be playing through the whole game starting next week. Be sure to subscribe, click the bell icon to be notified when the videos go up, and let's enjoy this game together.
A little bit there, because he's kind of right. It's like, wouldn't you just be trying to get out as well?
Laden with guitar-heavy rock and Eastern-influenced songs, the music in The Bouncer is very good, and so it should be. Scored by Noriko Matsueda and Takahoshi Iguchi, it contains several vocal themes, such as the Japanese ending theme song Furthermore, performed by Leiko Noda. And the English language theme song Love is the Gift, performed by Shanice Wilson. Takashi Takita said that the lyrics of Love is the Gift, heard during the closing credits, signify the game's overall theme. The soundtrack is well constructed and can easily be enjoyed out of the game. There were 2 separate soundtracks released for the game, a North American version and a Japanese version, the latter being the definitive release on 2 CDs with a total of 29 tracks.
Can I send you something too? 'Cause my heart's missing.
voice acting in the game is another matter though. Both English and Japanese voices and subtitles are featured in the game, however because originally the game was planned to be released in North America close to the Japanese release, the English voice acting was recorded first and set as the main default, with the Japanese voices incorporated later and could be changed in the menu. This was to give the game more of a DVD style and quality. Also because of this was the first game to feature Dolby 5.1 surround sound. For its time the voice work is okay. Looking at it through today's standards though, it is past funny and is quite painful to listen to, whilst you can in part blame the script for being very cheesy.
Looks like he's got a heart after all, especially when it comes to her.
No kidding.
The constant pausing between character interactions are not only very telling of the game's age, but just make the game even harder to take seriously.
There's another one!
Despite the high-profile team behind it, the Sony hype and its high anticipation from the game playing public, the Bouncer was seen as a disappointment by many and considered mediocre at best. It was not a commercial success and only made it to the 53rd highest selling game of that year across all systems. It looked amazing but played poorly. It had a banging soundtrack, but the script and vocals left a lot to be desired. Whilst it does have its fans out there, I don't see this game getting the remake treatment anytime soon or even a remaster. Personally, I do have a soft spot for the game, but only from a nostalgic point of view. It was one of the first games I played on the PlayStation 2 and I was amazed that games could look and sound this good. As for the gameplay itself, I actually quite enjoyed it. Whilst I did get frustrated trying to get the whole story, that was all put aside by the enjoyment I got out of playing the game with friends in 3-on-1 brawls in the game's multiplayer.
If you've made it to the end of the video, then thank you so much. The Bouncer is a game that I've been looking forward to covering on Retro Reviews, and I hope that comes across. If you have enjoyed the video, please be sure to leave me a like, and if you feel inclined to say hello or anything else in the comments down below, then do so. Check out the rest of the channel, subscribe, and if you want to see what all the Bouncer fuss is about, then come back next week to see myself, Tiger Tom and Ninja Chloe play through the whole game over the festive period. TTFN and ta-ta for now.